It was one of those perfect afternoons in the city, the kind where the golden sunlight streamed through the trees, casting intricate shadows on the cobblestone streets. The air buzzed with life, couples strolling hand in hand, street performers drawing small crowds, and the faint hum of conversations spilling out from nearby cafes. Amidst all this vibrancy stood a restaurant, a beacon of sophistication and exclusivity. Its name alone carried weight, whispered among the elite as the place to dine, where reservations were made months in advance, and every detail, down to the placement of a single flower on a table, was meticulously curated. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing short of opulent. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling, their light reflecting off polished marble floors. The soft clinking of glasses and the murmur of elegant conversations filled the air. Waiters moved with precision, their uniforms spotless, their movements choreographed like a ballet. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage, and everyone inside was playing their part in a performance of wealth and status. And then she walked in. She didn't fit the script. Not even close. The woman pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside, her presence immediately drawing curious glances from those seated near the entrance. She wasn't dressed for this kind of place, not by their standards. Her coat was simple, worn at the edges, and her shoes had clearly seen better days. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and there wasn't a trace of makeup on her face. But there was something about her, something unspoken yet undeniable. She carried herself with quiet confidence, as if she belonged anywhere she chose to be, no matter what anyone else thought. She paused for a moment at the entrance, taking in her surroundings. Her eyes swept over the room, not with envy or intimidation, but with calm curiosity. It was as if she were observing an art exhibit rather than stepping into one of the most exclusive dining establishments in the city. The hostess at the front desk noticed her immediately. Dressed in a sleek black dress that screamed designer label, the hostess had perfected the art of polite condescension, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a tone that was just warm enough to mask its underlying frostiness. "Good afternoon," the hostess said, her voice smooth but clipped. "Do you have a reservation?" The woman smiled, a small, genuine smile that seemed almost out of place in this world of pretense. "No," she said simply. "I was hoping to get a table." The hostess's perfectly arched eyebrows lifted ever so slightly, a subtle but unmistakable signal of judgment. She glanced down at her reservation book as if searching for an excuse. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment, her tone now tinged with thinly veiled disdain. "We're fully booked for today." The woman nodded slowly, her expression unchanged. "I see," she said softly. "Well, thank you anyway." She turned to leave, but before she could take more than a step toward the door, another voice cut through the air, a voice dripping with sarcasm. "Fully booked? Or just not for her?" The comment came from a man seated near the entrance, a regular customer by the looks of him, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. He leaned back in his chair with an amused smirk, swirling his wine glass lazily as he watched the scene unfold. The hostess shot him a sharp look but didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to her desk and pretended to busy herself with paperwork. The woman hesitated for just a moment before continuing toward the door. But as she reached for it, something unexpected happened. One of the waiters, young and clearly new to this environment, stepped forward hesitantly. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of conversation. "If you'd like, I think we might be able to find you a seat." The hostess whipped around to face him, her expression icy enough to freeze water on contact. "That won't be necessary," she said sharply before turning back to the woman with that same practiced smile. "Thank you for stopping by." For a brief moment, just a flicker, the woman's calm exterior seemed to waver. It wasn't anger or humiliation that crossed her face, but something deeper, something quieter, yet infinitely more powerful: disappointment. It was as if she had expected this outcome all along but had hoped, just for once, that things might be different. She nodded again, more to herself than anyone else, and stepped outside into the afternoon light. As soon as she was gone, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Conversations resumed, laughter rippled through the air once more, and it was as if nothing had happened at all. But outside was where everything would change. The woman stood on the sidewalk for a moment, pulling out her phone from her pocket. She dialed a number quickly and brought it to her ear. "It's me," she said softly when someone picked up on the other end. There was no anger in her voice, only calm resolve. "I'm at that restaurant we talked about." There was a pause as whoever was on the other line responded. "Yes," she continued after a moment. "That one." Another pause. "No," she said finally, glancing back at the restaurant's ornate facade with an almost imperceptible smile playing at her lips. "They didn't let me in." And then she hung up. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and turned away from the restaurant, but not before catching sight of something out of the corner of her eye. Faces pressed against windows inside, watching her leave with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity to outright disdain. They thought they knew who she was, what kind of person she must be, but they didn't have even half of it right. Because what they didn't know, what none of them could have possibly guessed, was that this story wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. It was the kind of evening that made the city feel alive. The streets were bustling, glowing under the soft amber light of street lamps, and the air carried the faint scent of rain from earlier in the day. Inside the restaurant, everything was perfectly curated, the lighting dimmed to just the right level, the sound of soft jazz weaving through conversations like a gentle thread. It was a world of elegance, exclusivity, and quiet indulgence. But amidst this polished perfection, there was an undercurrent, a ripple that had started earlier when a woman walked through the door. She wasn't dressed for this kind of place, her worn coat and simple shoes standing out like a misplaced note in a symphony. And yet, there had been something about her, something that lingered even after she left. The hostess returned to her station, her posture stiff as she tried to shake off the interaction. She hadn't thought much of it at first. People like that didn't belong here. This was a restaurant for the elite, for those who could afford to spend hundreds on a single meal without blinking. But as the minutes ticked by, she found herself glancing toward the door more often than usual, as if expecting something or someone. And then it happened. A sleek Porsche pulled up outside, its glossy black surface reflecting the lights of the city like liquid night. The car was an unmistakable symbol of wealth and power, turning heads even in a place where luxury was commonplace. The hostess straightened instinctively, her professional smile returning as she prepared to greet whoever stepped out. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man who immediately commanded attention. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to mold itself to his frame. His presence was magnetic, sharp features, confident stride, and there was an air about him that made people stop and look without even realizing they were doing it. He didn't hesitate as he walked toward the entrance, his movements purposeful and unhurried. When he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted, not dramatically but subtly, like the way a room feels different when someone important walks in. The hostess greeted him with her most polished smile. "Good evening," she said smoothly. "Do you have a reservation?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the room briefly before turning his gaze back to her, a gaze so piercing it felt like it could see right through her. "I'm looking for someone," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. The hostess blinked, momentarily thrown off by his directness. "Of course," she replied quickly. "May I ask who you're looking for?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. After typing something quickly, he held it up to his ear and waited. "Where are you?" he said when someone answered on the other end. There was a pause as he listened to the response. "Outside?" he repeated, his tone shifting slightly, still calm, but now tinged with something else, something harder to define. Another pause. "I'll be right there," he said before hanging up abruptly. Without another word to the hostess or anyone else in the room, he turned and walked back toward the door. The hostess watched him go, her curiosity piqued but tempered by professionalism. She didn't know who he was or what had brought him here, but she could tell one thing. This wasn't just another customer looking for a table. Outside, the woman from earlier was still standing near the curb. She hadn't left yet, not because she couldn't, but because she hadn't wanted to. There had been something about this place that had drawn her in, a curiosity she couldn't quite explain, and even after being turned away, she found herself lingering. When she saw him step out of the restaurant and walk toward her, her expression softened, not surprised but relieved. He stopped in front of her and looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Are you okay?" he asked simply. She nodded but didn't say anything right away. Instead, She glanced back at the restaurant briefly before returning her gaze to him. "They wouldn't let me in," she said quietly. Not bitterly or angrily, but with a kind of resigned acceptance that carried its own weight. He frowned slightly, not at her, but at what she'd said, and turned to look at the restaurant himself. His jaw tightened just enough to be noticeable before he spoke again. "Come with me," he said firmly but gently. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding again and following him back inside. When they walked through the door together this time, everything changed. The hostess's eyes widened slightly when she saw them enter, her polished demeanor faltering just enough for those paying attention to notice. The man didn't stop at her desk or wait for an explanation. Instead, he walked straight past her into the main dining area with the woman by his side. Heads turned as they moved through the room, not because they were loud or disruptive, but because their presence demanded attention in a way that couldn't be ignored. Conversations paused, glasses hovered midair. Even the waitstaff seemed momentarily frozen as they watched them pass by. The man stopped near one of the tables and gestured for one of the senior staff members, a manager, to come over. When the manager approached hesitantly, clearly unsure of what was happening, the man spoke again, this time louder so everyone nearby could hear. "This is my wife," he said plainly but powerfully enough that it felt like an announcement rather than just a statement. The room went silent, completely silent, as his words sank in. "She came here earlier," he continued after a brief pause, "and you turned her away." His tone wasn't angry or accusatory. It was calm, but carried an undeniable weight that made every word feel significant. "I want you all to remember something," he added after another pause. "You don't judge people by what they wear or how they look, or by any other superficial measure." He glanced around at everyone nearby before finishing, "Because you never know who they really are." The silence lingered long after he stopped speaking, an uncomfortable yet necessary silence filled with reflection rather than fear or embarrassment. And just like that, everything changed again, but this time for good. The door to the restaurant swung open with a quiet grace, but the impact was anything but subtle. Heads turned almost instinctively, conversations faltered mid-sentence, and even the soft strains of jazz seemed to fade into the background. A man stepped inside, tall and commanding, his tailored suit fitting him like it had been crafted by the hands of an artist. His presence was magnetic, pulling the attention of everyone in the room without him uttering a single word. He walked with purpose, each step deliberate, as though he owned not just the space but the very air within it. His sharp features caught the light, high cheekbones, a strong jawline that seemed chiseled from stone. But it wasn't just his appearance that made people look twice. It was something deeper, something intangible. Confidence radiated from him like heat from a flame, and yet there was no arrogance in his stride. He carried himself with a quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. As he moved further into the room, whispers rippled through the crowd like waves on a still pond disturbed by a single drop. "Who is he?" someone murmured under their breath. "He looks familiar," another whispered. But no one dared to approach him. He wasn't just a man entering a restaurant. He was an event. The hostess at the front desk straightened immediately when she saw him approach. Her polished demeanor faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, plastering on her most professional smile. "Good evening," she said brightly, though her voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "Do you have a reservation?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he let his gaze sweep across the room, taking in every detail with sharp precision. His eyes were searching for something or someone, and when they finally landed on the hostess again, they were filled with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. "I'm looking for my wife," he said simply, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. The hostess blinked, momentarily thrown off by his directness. "Your wife?" she repeated, as though trying to buy herself time to process what he'd said. "Yes," he replied, his tone steady but firm. "She came here earlier." Recognition flickered across her face then, a realization that hit her like a slap she hadn't seen coming. The woman from earlier, could it be? I believe she may have been here," the hostess stammered, her polished exterior beginning to crack under his gaze. "But I wasn't aware." She was turned away. He interrupted gently but firmly, cutting through her excuses like a blade through silk. The hostess froze, her face paling slightly as she realized the gravity of what had happened. She opened her mouth to respond, to apologize or explain, but no words came out. The man's expression didn't change much as he watched her struggle for words. There was no anger in his eyes, at least not outwardly. But there was something else, disappointment. It was subtle but unmistakable, and somehow it cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. "I need to speak with your manager," he said finally, his voice as calm as ever but laced with an underlying intensity that left no room for argument. "Of course," the hostess said quickly, nodding as she scrambled to find the manager. As she hurried away, the man turned slightly and glanced around the room again. The whispers had grown louder now. People were leaning toward each other in hushed tones, speculating about who he was and why he was here. But he paid them no mind. A moment later, the manager appeared, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and an air of authority that seemed to shrink slightly under the billionaire's gaze. He extended his hand nervously as he approached. "Good evening," the manager said cautiously. "How can I assist you?" The man didn't take his hand. Instead, he looked him directly in the eye and said four words that hung in the air like a thunderclap. "You turned my wife away." The manager's face fell instantly, his confident demeanor crumbling like sand underfoot. I wasn't aware," he began weakly before trailing off under the weight of the man's stare. "She came here earlier," the man continued evenly, his voice low but resonant enough to carry across the room. "She asked for a table, something simple, and she was told no." The manager opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. "I don't care about excuses," the man went on after a brief pause. "What I care about is how you treat people. All people, not just those who look like they belong here." His words cut through the room like lightning through a stormy sky. The staff nearby froze in place. Even some of the guests stopped eating mid-bite to listen. "This restaurant," he continued after another pause, gesturing subtly around him with one hand, "is supposed to be about more than just food and ambience. It's supposed to be about hospitality, about making people feel welcome." He let those words hang in the air for a moment before adding quietly but powerfully, "And today, you failed." The silence that followed was deafening, a heavy stillness that seemed to press down on everyone in earshot. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was likely only seconds, the manager spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry." The man nodded slightly but didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. "Come inside," he said simply when someone answered on the other end of the line. Moments later, all eyes turned toward the entrance once more as she walked in, the woman who had been turned away earlier now re-entering alongside her husband. This time, everything was different. This time, no one dared to look down on her or judge her by what she wore or how she looked, because now they knew who she really was, and more importantly, they knew who he was. But even as they watched her re-enter with newfound respect, or perhaps fear, there was one thing they couldn't have known. This wasn't just about one woman or one moment or even one mistake. This was about something bigger, something deeper, a lesson that would echo far beyond these walls. Never judge someone by appearances alone, because you never know who they might be or what they might teach you about yourself. The room was silent, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty. No, this was a silence that carried weight, a silence that held the collective breath of everyone present. The woman stood at the center of it all, her presence calm, yet commanding. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes, she didn't wear sparkling jewels, and yet somehow, she seemed to outshine everything around her. It wasn't what she wore or how she looked, it was who she was. Her husband stood beside her, tall and composed, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The energy between them was palpable, an unspoken bond that told anyone paying attention that this was a partnership built on something far deeper than appearances or wealth. Together, they faced the room, the staff, the diners, the manager who still looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. And then, she spoke. "I came here today," she began softly, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable strength. "Not because I wanted to make a scene or prove a point. I came here because I was hungry and thought I'd find a warm meal and a welcoming place to sit." She paused for a moment, letting her words settle over the room like snow falling on a quiet street. But instead, she continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces in front of her, "I was judged by how I looked, judged by what I wore, judged by assumptions that had nothing to do with who I am. Her words weren't angry. They didn't need to be. There was something far more powerful in their simplicity, in the way they cut straight to the heart of the matter without pretense or theatrics. "I'm not here to hold grudges," she said after a moment, her tone softening just slightly. "I'm not here to demand apologies or make anyone feel small." She glanced at the hostess then, the young woman who had turned her away earlier, and offered a small smile that carried no malice, only understanding. "What I am here to do," she continued, her voice growing firmer now, "is remind all of us, myself included, that kindness doesn't cost anything. Respect doesn't cost anything. And yet, they're some of the most valuable things we can give to one another." The room remained silent as her words hung in the air like a melody that refused to fade. Even those who had initially dismissed her, those who had whispered and judged from their tables, now sat with their heads bowed slightly, as if ashamed of their own complicity in what had happened. Her husband stepped forward then, his presence adding another layer of gravity to the moment. "My wife has said everything that needs to be said," he began, his voice low but resonant enough to fill the room without effort. "But I want to add one thing." He turned his gaze toward the manager and then let it sweep across the rest of the staff before continuing. "This restaurant isn't just about food," he said firmly. "It's about hospitality. It's about creating a space where people feel welcome, where they feel valued, not because of what they wear or how much money they have, but because they're human beings." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in before adding quietly but powerfully, "And if we can't do that, then what's the point?" The weight of his words was undeniable. The manager nodded quickly, almost too quickly, as if trying to show he understood without fully knowing how to respond. "We'll do better," the manager said finally, his voice shaky but sincere. "I promise." The man nodded once before turning back toward his wife. She met his gaze with a small smile, a private exchange between two people who didn't need words to communicate. Together, they turned and began walking toward the door. The room seemed to exhale collectively as they moved through it, their departure leaving behind an atmosphere charged with reflection and quiet resolve. But just before they reached the exit, something unexpected happened. The hostess, the same young woman who had dismissed her earlier, stepped forward hesitantly. Her face was flushed with embarrassment, but there was determination in her eyes as she called out softly, "Wait." The couple stopped and turned back toward her. The hostess faltered for a moment before taking a deep breath and starting again. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she held her ground despite the tears welling up in her eyes. "I shouldn't have treated you like that," she continued after a moment, her voice steadier now. "It wasn't right." The woman studied her for a long moment before stepping closer. "Thank you," she said simply but sincerely. And then she added gently, "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." The hostess nodded quickly, blinking back tears as relief washed over her face. As the couple finally stepped outside into the cool evening air, there was a sense of closure, not just for them, but for everyone who had witnessed what had unfolded inside. They walked hand in hand down the sidewalk, their pace unhurried, as if savoring this rare moment of clarity between them. "Do you think they'll really change?" she asked softly after a while. Her husband glanced at her and smiled faintly. "I think we gave them something to think about," he replied. "The rest is up to them." She nodded thoughtfully but didn't say anything else. Above them, the stars were beginning to peek through the night sky, tiny pinpricks of light against an endless expanse of darkness. And as they walked together beneath them, there was an unspoken understanding between them. This wasn't just about one restaurant or one experience or even one lesson learned. This was about something bigger, something deeper, a reminder that every interaction we have carries weight, and that sometimes, even small moments can spark profound change. Because at its core, this wasn't just a story about judgment or redemption or even kindness. It was a story about humanity and our ability to see beyond what's on the surface, if only we choose to look closely enough.
Vin Diesel secretly walks into his own restaurant, stops cold when he hears a server crying. Years ago, he had opened Torque's, a high-end but welcoming restaurant in Los Angeles, California. It wasn't a vanity project or some side hustle to burn money. He had spent years perfecting the menu, hiring the right chefs, and making sure his restaurant was a place where both everyday folks and Hollywood elites could enjoy a great meal. But Vin also knew that no business, no matter how successful, ran smoothly just because the numbers looked good on paper. The real truth of a place wasn't found in profit margins. It was found in the back kitchens, in breakroom whispers, in the exhausted sighs of employees after a long shift. That's why every few months Vin made a habit of walking into Torque's as a regular customer. No flashy entrance, no announcement. Just a man in a hoodie and jeans, stepping into his own business like anyone else. That night, the place was buzzing. The Friday dinner rush was in full swing, with servers darting between tables, balancing trays of sizzling steaks and cocktails. The scent of garlic butter and grilled ribeye filled the air. The ambient lighting cast a golden glow over couples, friends, and solo diners enjoying their meals. At first glance, everything seemed fine, but Vin had spent enough time in the industry to know that looks could be deceiving. He spotted the manager, a tall, rigid-looking man in a navy blue dress shirt, standing at the edge of the floor, watching everything too closely, like a hawk circling its prey. There was something about his stance that felt off, not just observant, controlling. Then, as Vin moved toward the bar, he heard it. A soft, muffled sound coming from the side hallway near the kitchen. At first, he barely noticed it. But as he walked past, the sound became clearer. Someone was crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. The kind of cry you let out when you're trying desperately not to break. Vin's footsteps slowed. He turned his head slightly toward the breakroom door. It was slightly ajar. Inside, he caught a glimpse of a young woman, head bowed, fingers gripping the edge of a metal counter like she was trying to keep herself from collapsing. Another employee, a young man in a Torque's uniform, stood beside her, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Vin didn't know her, but the look on her face, that hit him like a gut punch. Something was very, very wrong. And he wasn't leaving until he found out what. He turned back toward the bar, taking a seat on one of the stools. His face was calm, but his mind was racing. The crying, it wasn't just stress. It was fear. Vin had worked in restaurants before. He knew what it was like to deal with rude customers, long shifts, aching feet. But this was different. His first instinct was to walk over and ask if she was okay. But right now, he wasn't Vin Diesel, the owner of Torque's. He was just another customer. A stranger. So instead, he listened. The young man beside her, probably a fellow server, kept his voice low. Vin could only make out fragments. "You can't let him. He doesn't own you." The woman, her voice barely audible, responded. "What choice do I have?" He made it clear, "If I don't do what he says, I'm gone." Vin's grip tightened around the glass of water the bartender had set in front of him. At first he thought it might be about a customer. Maybe someone had harassed her. But the way she said it wasn't about a customer. It was about someone inside the restaurant. Before he could think further, a bartender approached him. "Hey, what can I get you?" Vin turned, offering a polite smile. "Just a water for now." The bartender nodded and moved on. But Vin wasn't focused on drinks. He glanced toward the manager in the navy blue shirt, still standing near the floor, arms crossed, scanning the room with the kind of presence that made people nervous. Then he noticed something else. The young man from the break room, probably a fellow server, had stepped out, walking back onto the floor. His jaw was tight. His hands fidgeted as he adjusted the notepad in his apron. He looked rattled. Vin knew an opening when he saw one. He stood up, casually walking toward the server station near the back of the restaurant, where the young man was organizing plates. "Hey, man," Vin said, keeping his voice low. "Got a pen?" The young man looked up, startled. "Oh, yeah, sure." He grabbed one from the counter and handed it over. Vin took it but didn't walk away. He glanced at the employee's name tag. "Tyler." "Hey, Tyler," Vin said, voice even. "I couldn't help but notice. Your friend seems upset." Tyler stiffened. His grip on the stack of plates tightened. "She's fine," he said too quickly. Vin tilted his head slightly. "She doesn't look fine." Tyler swallowed, his eyes darting toward the manager in the navy blue shirt before dropping to the floor. Vin had been around long enough to recognize that kind of reaction. After a long pause, Tyler exhaled. "She's not fine," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Vin studied Tyler's face, reading the tension in his jaw and the way his fingers kept gripping the notepad at his waist. The kid wanted to talk. He just wasn't sure if he could. Vin lowered his voice just enough. "Is it a customer issue?" Tyler hesitated. That pause told Vin everything. "No." Tyler muttered. It's not. His eyes flicked toward the front of the restaurant, toward the manager in the navy blue shirt who was still standing near the hostess station, watching the room like he owned it. Tyler exhaled sharply, glancing back toward the break room before shaking his head. It's her personal business. That was a lie. Not because Tyler wanted to mislead him, but because he was afraid. Vin had seen it before. Employees stuck in bad situations, unable to walk away because of financial pressure, personal struggles, or worse, fear. Vin leaned on the counter slightly, keeping his posture relaxed. How long has she been working here? Tyler responded automatically. A little over a year. Then he tensed. Why? Vin shrugged, keeping his tone light. Just wondering if she likes it here. Tyler let out a short, humorless chuckle. She doesn't, but she can't afford to leave. And there it was. The real problem. She wasn't just stressed, she was trapped. Vin's gut tightened. This wasn't just about a bad work environment. Something deeper was going on here. Before he could ask anything else, Tyler stiffened. Vin didn't need to turn around to know why. The air shifted, thick with something unspoken. The manager was walking toward them. Everything okay over here? The manager's voice was smooth but firm. Tyler immediately dropped his gaze, busying himself with the plates in front of him. Yes, sir. Just helping a customer. Vin turned and finally faced the man up close. Mid-40s. Crisp shirt, neatly combed hair, the kind of sharp features that had seen too much and cared too little. This wasn't just a tough boss. This was someone who knew exactly how much control he had and enjoyed it. The name tag on his shirt read, Rick Calloway. Can I help you with something? Calloway asked, polite but edged. Vin smiled casually. Just getting a pen. Tyler here was kind enough to help me out. Calloway didn't break eye contact. Good, he said, clapping Tyler on the shoulder a little too firmly. Let's stay focused on work. Tyler nodded quickly, eyes locked on the plates in front of him. Yes, sir. Vin clenched his jaw but didn't react, not yet. He thanked Tyler and stepped away, feeling Calloway's eyes on him the entire time. His mind was already made up. He wasn't leaving. Not until he figured out exactly what was happening in this restaurant. He stepped outside for a moment, letting the night air cool his frustration. From where he stood, it probably looked like he was just checking his phone. In reality, he was thinking hard. Something wasn't adding up. Emily was terrified. Tyler was hesitant. And Calloway? That man had the look of someone who thrived on control. Vin had dealt with plenty of bad managers before, but this was different. This was calculated. If he wanted real answers, he needed to talk to someone who wasn't afraid. And then, as if the universe was working in his favor, Nate, the bartender from earlier, stepped outside. The kid was leaning against the side of the building, scrolling through his phone, probably on a break. Vin saw his opening. He walked up casually, hands in his pockets. Long night? Nate looked up, startled, then relaxed when he recognized him. Yeah, Fridays are always nuts. Vin nodded, leaning against the wall beside him. Mind if I ask you something? Nate hesitated but shrugged. Sure. Vin kept his voice light. Your manager, Calloway. What's he like? Nate's expression darkened. It was quick, just a flicker. But Vin caught it. He's, strict, Nate said carefully. Likes things done a certain way. Vin tilted his head. That normal for managers? Nate exhaled, looking around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Then he lowered his voice. He's not just strict. Nate struggled for the right word. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something that made Vin's stomach turn. He makes Emily stay late. Alone. Vin's muscles tensed. She's the only one? Nate nodded. Yeah, and he's always talking to her like she owes him something. I've seen it, man. The way she tenses up when he calls her into his office. It's not normal. Vin's grip tightened around his arms. He had seen this before. A manager who played power games with employees, singling out the vulnerable ones, making them feel like they had no choice but to obey. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. She ever say anything about it? Nate shook his head. Number. But she doesn't have to. We all see it. Vin exhaled slowly. Now he wasn't just dealing with a toxic boss. He was dealing with a predator. And that changed everything. Thanks for telling me. Nate. Vin patted him on the shoulder. You're a good guy. Nate gave a half smile, but still looked uneasy. Vin turned, glancing back at the building. Emily was still inside. Still under Calloway's control. And now, Vin knew exactly what he needed to do. He wasn't waiting. Not when he had seen this pattern before. He had climbed his way up through Hollywood, had dealt with his fair share of power-hungry executives who manipulated people beneath him. He knew how easy it was for a man in power to twist the system in his favor. The employees under Calloway's control weren't just uncomfortable. They were afraid. And Emily, she was at the center of it. Vin pushed open the glass doors and walked back inside. The restaurant had slowed down, the dinner rush winding to a close. Fewer customers, fewer witnesses, but Calloway was still there, standing near the server stations, scanning the room like he owned it. Vin's footsteps were steady as he crossed the floor. He didn't stop at the bar. He didn't hesitate. He went straight for Emily. She was mid-conversation with a customer, her voice mechanical, her hands steady, but her eyes looked hollow. She saw Vin approaching and tensed slightly, like she expected trouble. "Excuse me," Vin said, just loud enough for the customer to hear. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Emily blinked, confused. I'm with a customer, sir." The woman in front of her frowned. "She's helping me right now. You can wait." But Vin kept his eyes on Emily. "It's important." And she knew. She swallowed, apologized to the customer, and stepped away from the counter. Calloway noticed immediately. Vin saw him straighten, eyes narrowing. He didn't like losing control. Emily led Vin a few steps away, fidgeting with the edge of her apron. What can I help you with, sir?" Vin took a slow breath. "I know what's happening." His voice was low. "You don't have to say anything. I just need you to know. You're not alone." Emily flinched. For a second, just a second, she looked like she might break. But then she shook her head, forcing a tight smile. "I don't know what you mean." Vin wasn't giving up. "Calloway, the late shifts, the way he treats you. I know it's not okay." Her fingers curled into fists. Fear. That's what this was. And fear meant she thought she had no way out. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Vin said firmly. "And you will. Because I promise you, he's not untouchable." Before Emily could respond, a shadow loomed beside them. Rick Calloway had arrived, his expression cool but his eyes sharp with irritation. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was polite, but Vin could hear the warning in it. He didn't turn to face Calloway immediately. Instead, he kept his focus on Emily, watching how she shrank slightly at the sound of his voice, how her fingers clenched around the hem of her apron. That reaction told Vin everything. He turned, keeping his face neutral. "Just having a conversation." Calloway's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Emily has a job to do. She doesn't have time for private discussions." Vin caught the way Emily flinched at the word private. That was all the confirmation he needed. His stance shifted just slightly, squaring his shoulders, his presence suddenly taking up more space. "Actually," Vin said, his voice steady, "I think we should have a conversation right now." Calloway's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" Vin reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing his executive ownership credentials for Torque's restaurant group. Emily gasped. The servers nearby froze. Calloway's face drained of color. "My name is Vin Diesel," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And you and I need to talk." The restaurant fell into a stunned silence. Customers glanced over, sensing that something far bigger than a simple work dispute was happening. Employees exchanged wide-eyed looks. Calloway blinked rapidly, his mouth opening, then closing. For the first time, the man looked nervous. "Sir, I didn't realize—" "No, you didn't," Vin interrupted. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" He turned slightly, his voice shifting from ice-cold authority to something gentler as he addressed Emily. "You're safe now." She stared at him, as if still processing what was happening. Her lips parted slightly, a shaky breath escaping. Then, for the first time that night, she stood a little taller. Calloway's discomfort was almost palpable. "Sir, I assure you there's been a misunderstanding," he stammered, trying to regain control. "If you just give me a moment to— Your office. Now." Vin cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. Calloway swallowed hard, his confidence cracking. He turned stiffly and led the way toward his office at the back of the restaurant. Vin followed, but before stepping inside, he turned back to Emily. "Stay here," he told her gently. "This won't take long." Emily barely nodded, her hands still trembling at her sides. As the office door closed behind them, Calloway tried again to regain his composure. He let out a forced chuckle, shaking his head. "I have to say, sir, I didn't expect to see you here tonight." A bit unusual for the owner to visit unannounced. Vin leaned forward, planting both hands on the desk. You know what else is unusual? He asked, his voice dangerously low. A restaurant manager abusing his power to intimidate his employees. Calloway flinched. I don't know what you mean, he tried. Vin's stare didn't waver. I know what you've been doing. I know about the late-night shifts. I know how you treat Emily. And I know you think you can get away with it. Calloway's face paled. Sir, I assure you, I have always conducted myself professionally. If there have been any misunderstandings, save it. Vin snapped. He wasn't here for excuses. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a single tap, he played back a recording. Emily's voice, raw and shaken, came through the speaker. If I don't do what he says, I'm gone. Then, Tyler's hushed response. You can't let him. He doesn't own you. The color drained from Calloway's face. You should have known better, Vin said. His voice even colder now. You've been playing this game for a long time, haven't you? Preying on employees who need their jobs the most. Making them feel trapped. But let me be very clear, you just ran out of time. Calloway's hands trembled. Please, I can explain. No, you can't. Vin interrupted. He pulled out his phone again, this time dialing corporate HR. You're done, he said simply. You will never work in this industry again. Calloway sat there, frozen, as Vin stepped toward the door. His power was gone. And Vin? He wasn't done yet. When Vin walked back into the restaurant, the tension in the air was thick. Emily, Tyler, Nate, and the rest of the employees were waiting. Vin took a breath, then looked directly at Emily. He's gone, he said softly. You're safe. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching, disbelief, relief. Then, for the first time that night, her shoulders relaxed. She let out a slow exhale. Nate looked stunned. Other employees exchanged glances, as if they weren't sure whether to believe what they had just witnessed. But Vin knew this wasn't the end. He turned to the team. You've all been working under someone who didn't deserve his position, he said. That changes now. Emily wiped at her eyes, swallowing hard. What happens next? Vin gave her a small, reassuring smile. You tell me. She stared at him, processing his words. For the first time in over a year, she felt something unfamiliar. Control. She glanced at Tyler, who was still in shock, then at Nate, who gave a small, hesitant nod. They were all waiting for her to speak. Emily took a shaky breath. I don't want anyone else to go through this, she admitted. Not here. Not anywhere. Vin nodded. And they won't. He turned to the rest of the employees. From now on, this restaurant is under direct review. We'll be making changes, not just replacing Calloway, but making sure no one else like him gets this kind of power again. The room was quiet, but the weight of his words settled in. Then, Tyler spoke up. Sir, I don't mean to overstep, but this isn't just about Calloway. Vin's gaze sharpened. Go on. Tyler hesitated, but then he took a step forward, his voice stronger now. The way things work here, it's not just one bad manager. The pressure, the way we're treated, the fear of speaking up. It's bigger than just this restaurant. Nate nodded in agreement. A lot of us feel like we have no choice but to put up with it. The second we complain, we're out of a job. Emily looked down, guilt flickering across her face. I wanted to leave so many times, she admitted. But I couldn't afford to, and I thought maybe this was normal. Vin's jaw tightened. This was why he went undercover. Not because of numbers, not because of performance reviews, but because the real problems were the ones hidden beneath the surface. He took a deep breath. That stops today. Everyone watched him, waiting for what came next. I don't just want to fix this restaurant. I want to fix the system. And I'll need your help to do that. That means transparency. That means trust. That means if something is wrong, you speak up. Emily still looked uncertain. And if we do, will anyone actually listen? Vin met her eyes. I will. She studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. And for the first time that night, she looked like she believed it. An hour later, Vin sat in his car, watching as the employees slowly locked up for the night. Emily walked out with Tyler and Nate, the three of them talking quietly. They looked lighter, like the weight of the last year had finally started to lift. Vin exhaled, running a hand over his face. This had been one restaurant, one manager, one location. But how many more were out there? How many employees just like Emily were afraid to speak up? How many times had he looked at a report and thought everything was fine when it wasn't? Being a leader wasn't just about profit margins or efficiency. It was about people. And tonight, he had been reminded of exactly why he did this. Too often, people in power looked the other way. They saw employees as numbers, not human beings. But leadership isn't about control. It's about responsibility. If you ever feel trapped in a situation where someone is abusing their power, speak up. And if you see someone else struggling, don't stay silent. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to break the cycle.
Maya Williams, the new girl at Clearview High. Have you ever felt like a stranger in a place where everyone else seemed to belong? That's exactly how Maya Williams felt as she stepped off the school bus and into the bustling world of Clearview High School in Houston, Texas. But Maya wasn't just any new student. She carried with her the weight of countless transfers, the burden of always being the outsider, and a determination to stay invisible. Little did she know, this new school would soon become the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. Maya tightened her grip on her backpack straps as she stood outside the towering brick building. The air was crisp with the faint scent of freshly cut grass, mingling with the distant hum of morning traffic. Around her, students moved in clusters, laughing, shouting, and greeting friends they hadn't seen since yesterday. Maya felt like an intruder in their world, a world that had already been built and fortified long before she arrived. This wasn't her first time being the new girl. In fact, it was her fourth school transfer in 3 years. Each move had its reasons, some practical, some deeply personal. But for Maya, every transfer meant starting over. It meant learning new hallways, new faces, and new rules. Most importantly, it meant figuring out how to blend in without drawing attention to herself. As she walked toward the entrance, her head bowed slightly to avoid eye contact. She could feel the occasional glance from curious students. Who was this girl? Where did she come from? Maya knew those questions would swirl around for a few days before fading into indifference. That's how it always went. People were curious about new faces at first, but high school hierarchies were rigid. Newcomers rarely disrupted them. Clearview High wasn't much different from any other suburban school Maya had attended. It had its cliques, the athletes who dominated Friday nights on the football field, the cheerleaders who ruled Instagram with perfectly curated posts, the band kids who stuck together like family, and everyone else who fell somewhere in between. Maya didn't care about any of it. Her goal was simple: survive high school by staying under the radar. As she stepped inside the building, the chaos of a typical morning engulfed her. Lockers slammed shut as students hurried to grab their books before class. The squeak of sneakers echoed against polished tile floors. Teachers shouted instructions over the noise, trying to corral their students into classrooms before the bell rang. Maya clutched her schedule tightly and navigated through the crowd like a shadow. She had perfected this routine over the years: find her locker quickly, memorize her class schedule, figure out where to sit during lunch without attracting attention, and most importantly, identify who to avoid. It didn't take long for Maya to notice him. Bryce Carter. Even if someone didn't know Bryce's name, they knew his presence. He was tall and broad-shouldered with an aura of confidence that seemed almost tangible. Bryce wasn't just popular, he was powerful. He didn't need to say much to command attention. His smirk alone could silence a room or spark laughter from his entourage of Letterman jacket-clad jocks. Bryce leaned casually against a row of lockers near the center of the hallway, surrounded by his usual group of friends. They laughed loudly at something he'd said, a joke or comment that probably wasn't funny but was treated like gold simply because it came from him. Maya recognized his type immediately: star quarterback with good looks and a wealthy family background. He was the kind of guy who thrived on control, the kind who made people either want to follow him or fear him. Maya didn't plan on crossing paths with Bryce Carter. She didn't plan on crossing paths with anyone if she could help it. But fate had other ideas. As Maya walked past Bryce's group on her way to her locker, she felt it, the deliberate bump against her shoulder that sent her books tumbling to the floor. It wasn't an accident, it was calculated. A few students nearby turned their heads to watch. Some snickered quietly at her misfortune. Maya bent down quickly to pick up her books without saying a word or looking up. She'd been through this before. These moments where someone tried to test her patience or provoke a reaction. She knew better than to give them what they wanted. Well, what do we have here? The voice above her was calm, but laced with mockery. Maya froze for a moment before looking up slowly. Bryce Carter stood over her with his arms crossed, and that infuriating smirk plastered across his face. The same smirk she'd seen on every bully who thought they ruled their little kingdom. "I don't think I've seen you here before," Bryce said smoothly. "You knew?" Maya didn't respond immediately. She simply picked up her books and stood up without saying a word. But Bryce wasn't done. "Hey, where are your manners?" he called out loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I asked you a question." Maya kept walking without looking back. She knew this game all too well. The best way to deal with people like Bryce was not to engage. But Bryce didn't like being ignored. A sharp tug on her backpack stopped her in her tracks. Not enough to hurt, but enough to send a clear message. "I'm not letting this go." Maya turned around slowly and met Bryce's gaze head-on. For a moment, the hallway seemed to go silent, as even those who hadn't been paying attention started watching. "You shouldn't have done that," Maya said softly but firmly. Bryce raised an eyebrow before letting out a slow, mocking laugh. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" Maya didn't answer right away. She simply held his gaze steadily without flinching. Bryce tilted his head slightly and chuckled again, a sound filled with amusement but tinged with frustration at her lack of fear or reaction. "You're kind of weird, you know that?" His friends laughed behind him as if on cue. But Maya turned away once more and walked off without another word. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But what Bryce didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. For now, though, Maya focused on blending in as much as possible for the rest of the day. She found her classes easily enough and avoided drawing attention during lectures or group activities. At lunch, she chose an empty table near the edge of the cafeteria where she could eat alone in peace, or so she thought. From across the room, Bryce sat surrounded by his entourage at their usual table in the center of the cafeteria, the heart of social power at Clearview High, and occasionally glanced toward Maya's corner with an expression that hinted at curiosity mixed with annoyance. Maya ignored him as best as she could while silently preparing herself for whatever might come next. Bryce Carter, the bully who chose the wrong target. Bryce Carter had always been the king of Clearview High. His name carried weight in every hallway. His presence commanded attention in every room, and his smirk alone was enough to send shivers down the spines of anyone who dared to cross him. He wasn't just a bully. He was a force of nature, and he knew it. For Bryce, power wasn't just something he held. It was something he wielded, like a weapon, to keep everyone in line. And when Maya Williams walked into his school, quiet and unassuming, he saw her as just another easy target. To Bryce, Maya was an outsider, a nobody. She didn't walk with confidence, didn't have a group of friends surrounding her, and didn't even try to blend into the social fabric of the school. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, and seemed almost invisible. But to Bryce, that made her the perfect prey. He thrived on finding people like Maya, those who wouldn't fight back, those who wouldn't challenge him. It wasn't about hatred or malice for Bryce. It was about control. He loved the feeling of power that came from making others feel small. Bryce's reign at Clearview High had gone unchallenged for years. As the star quarterback of the football team, he was untouchable. Teachers overlooked his behavior because they needed him on the field. His peers either admired him or feared him, sometimes both. Even other bullies deferred to Bryce because they knew better than to compete with him for dominance. Bryce wasn't just popular. He was invincible, or so he thought. When he first noticed Maya in the hallway that morning, something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she moved, quietly, deliberately, as if she were trying not to be seen. Maybe it was the way she avoided looking at anyone directly, as though she were afraid of drawing attention to herself. Or maybe it was simply because she was new, and new faces always intrigued Bryce. Whatever the reason, he decided then and there that Maya would be his next target. It started small, an intentional bump in the hallway to knock her books out of her hands. He expected her to react like most people did, flustered, embarrassed, maybe even angry. But Maya didn't give him the reaction he wanted. She simply picked up her books and walked away without saying a word. That should have been the end of it. But for Bryce, it wasn't. Her lack of response irritated him more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just that she ignored him. It was how calm she seemed, how unaffected she appeared by his presence. Most people couldn't hide their fear or discomfort around Bryce. It fueled his ego to see them squirm under his gaze. But Maya? She didn't flinch. Bryce couldn't let that go. Over the next few days, he made it his mission to break her composure. He cornered her at her locker with sarcastic remarks about how friendly she seemed for a new student. He spread rumors about her being stuck up because she didn't talk to anyone. He even went out of his way to sit near her during lunch one day, loudly joking with his friends about how weird she was for sitting alone. But no matter what he did, Maya never reacted the way he expected. She didn't argue back when he insulted her. She didn't cry when he embarrassed her in front of others. She didn't even look angry when he pushed her buttons deliberately. Instead, she remained calm, almost unnervingly so, and continued going about her day as if Bryce Carter didn't exist. This only made Bryce more determined. For someone like Bryce, control was everything. He needed people to fear him because fear equaled respect in his mind. And yet here was this quiet girl who refused to play by his rules, who refused to acknowledge his power over her. It wasn't just frustrating, it was infuriating. Bryce began escalating his tactics. One afternoon during gym class, he accidentally threw a football too hard in Maya's direction, hitting her shoulder as she stood on the sidelines waiting for her turn. When the coach asked what happened, Bryce shrugged innocently and said it slipped from his hand, a lie everyone knew but no one dared question. Another time during a group project in history class, Bryce made snide comments about Maya's contributions loud enough for everyone else at the table to hear. "Wow, you're really pulling your weight here," he sneered sarcastically when she offered an idea for their presentation. Still, Maya didn't react. Her silence only fueled Bryce's obsession with breaking her resolve. What Bryce didn't realize, what no one realized, was that Maya wasn't ignoring him out of fear or weakness. She was watching him carefully, studying his behavior like a chess player analyzing their opponent's moves. She knew exactly what kind of person Bryce Carter was, someone who thrived on attention and craved validation through intimidation. Maya had dealt with bullies before, not just at school but in life, and she'd learned that fighting back directly only gave them what they wanted, a reaction. Instead of engaging with Bryce on his terms, Maya chose a different strategy, patience. She let him think he was winning while quietly preparing herself for what would come next. Bryce couldn't see it yet. He couldn't see how close he was to losing everything. But Maya could feel it building beneath the surface like a storm waiting to break. For now, though, Bryce still believed he held all the power. He strutted through Clearview High like a king surveying his kingdom, confident that no one could challenge him or take away what he'd built over years of manipulation and fear-mongering. But kings fall, and Bryce Carter was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Part 3. Maya's Secret Connection, a revelation that changes everything. What happens when the school bully picks on the wrong person? Someone with a connection so powerful it can turn the tables in ways no one could ever imagine? Bryce Carter, Clearview High's most feared student, thought he had found his next victim in Maya Williams, a quiet, reserved girl who seemed like an easy target. But what Bryce didn't know was that Maya had a secret. She wasn't just any ordinary student. She was Vin Diesel's adopted daughter, and that revelation would shake Bryce's confidence to its core. It all began with Bryce's relentless attempts to intimidate Maya. Day after day, he pushed her buttons, expecting her to crack under the pressure. But no matter what he did, whether it was mocking her in the hallways, spreading rumors, or embarrassing her in front of classmates, Maya remained calm. Her unyielding composure frustrated Bryce more than anything else. He couldn't understand why she wasn't reacting like everyone else did. Bryce thrived on fear and control. He was used to seeing people cower or lash out when he targeted them. But Maya was different. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, and didn't retaliate. Instead, she met his aggression with silence and patience, a strategy Bryce couldn't comprehend. What Bryce failed to realize was that Maya wasn't ignoring him out of weakness or fear. She was watching him carefully, calculating every move he made. She knew exactly what kind of person Bryce was, someone who relied on intimidation to maintain his status. And she also knew that power built on fear was fragile. Maya had dealt with bullies before, not just at school, but in life. And she had learned that the best way to defeat them wasn't through confrontation, but through patience and strategy. She let Bryce believe he was winning while quietly preparing herself for the moment when everything would change. That moment came one afternoon after school. Maya had just stepped outside, ready to head home, when Bryce appeared again, blocking her path with his usual smirk plastered across his face. Behind him stood a few of his friends, watching eagerly as if they were expecting another show. "You think you're tough, huh?" Bryce sneered, stepping closer to her. Maya didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at him calmly, her expression unreadable. "What's the matter?" Bryce continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you're better than me?" Maya exhaled softly and then did something that caught Bryce completely off guard. She laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh or a fearful one. It was genuine amusement. "I think," she said slowly, her voice steady and calm, "that you should walk away." Bryce's grin faltered for a brief moment before he recovered, stepping closer until he towered over her. "Oh yeah," he said smugly. "And why is that?" Maya leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper as she replied, "Because you have no idea who I am." Bryce chuckled dismissively and shook his head. "And who exactly are you?" Maya didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pressed a single button on her phone. A loud roar filled the air, the unmistakable sound of a powerful engine revving nearby. Moments later, a sleek black Dodge Charger Hellcat pulled up to the curb beside them. The car's presence alone was enough to turn heads. Its deep growl demanded attention. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing the driver, a tall, muscular man with an air of authority that couldn't be ignored. It was Vin Diesel. For the first time in his life, Bryce's confident smirk vanished entirely. His jaw tightened as his eyes flickered between Maya and the iconic figure sitting in the driver's seat of the Charger. The playful arrogance in his stance melted away, replaced by stiff uncertainty. The crowd that had gathered around them fell silent as they watched the scene unfold. Even Bryce's friends exchanged nervous glances behind him, unsure of what to do or say. Maya adjusted her backpack strap casually and turned back to Bryce with a small smile, the first genuine smile she'd shown all day. "Still think I'm weird?" she asked lightly. Bryce didn't answer because he couldn't. For once, he was the one feeling small. Vin Diesel didn't say much at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone sent a message louder than words ever could. He sat there calmly with one hand resting on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on Bryce, a look so intense it made even the most confident person feel exposed. Bryce swallowed hard as if trying to convince himself this wasn't real, that it was some kind of mistake or joke. But deep down, he knew better. "Get in," Vin said finally, his voice calm but firm, a command rather than a suggestion. Maya didn't hesitate. She walked past Bryce without another word and climbed into the passenger seat of the Charger as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As Vin started the engine and pulled away from the curb, Maya glanced back at Bryce through the rearview mirror one last time. His posture remained stiff, his expression unreadable. But Maya knew what he was feeling. Humiliation mixed with disbelief and fear. That evening at home, Maya recounted the events of the day to Vin over dinner. As she spoke about Bryce's behavior and how things had unfolded outside the school, Vin listened intently with a protective edge in his demeanor. "I can handle this," Vin said firmly when she finished recounting everything. "Just say the word, and I'll make sure that kid never bothers you again." But Maya shook her head resolutely. "No," she replied softly but confidently. "I need to handle this my way." Vin studied her for a moment before nodding in agreement, a gesture that spoke volumes about how much he respected her strength and resilience. "All right," he said finally. "But be careful. Boys like Bryce don't like to lose. They'll escalate things if they feel threatened." Maya knew he was right. She'd seen it before with bullies like Bryce who thrived on power and control. But she also knew something else. Power built on fear never lasts. If she could stay calm, if she could outlast him, Bryce would eventually unravel under his own arrogance. As Maya lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling above her, she began formulating a plan not to fight back directly, but to let Bryce destroy himself through his own actions. Maya's strategy: outwitting the bully. What do you do when someone tries to tear you down? Do you fight back with fire, or do you let them burn themselves out? Maya Williams knew the answer. She had faced bullies before, and she understood their game. Bryce Carter was no different. He thrived on intimidation, on forcing people to react, on feeding his ego with fear. But Maya wasn't like the others. She didn't fight back with aggression or anger. Instead, she chose a weapon far more powerful: her intelligence, her patience, and her unshakable composure. After Vin Diesel's unexpected appearance at school, Bryce was rattled. For the first time in his life, he felt small. But his bruised ego wouldn't let him back down. If anything, it made him more determined to prove he was still in control. Bryce doubled down on his efforts to humiliate Maya, convinced that if he pushed hard enough, she would crack. But Maya had a plan. She knew Bryce's type: arrogant, impulsive, and desperate for validation. People like him were their own worst enemies. They acted without thinking, driven by the need to maintain their dominance. All Maya had to do was wait for Bryce to make a mistake, and she knew it wouldn't take long. The next day at school, Bryce wasted no time trying to reassert his power. He spread rumors about Maya, telling anyone who would listen that she was stuck up and too good to talk to anyone. He made snide comments whenever she walked by, loud enough for others to hear, but subtle enough to avoid drawing attention from teachers. "Hey, new girl," he called out as Maya passed him in the hallway. "Still waiting for Daddy Diesel to come save you?" His friends laughed nervously, but Maya didn't even glance in his direction. She kept walking as if he didn't exist. Bryce's frustration grew with every encounter. No matter what he did, whether it was mocking her in class or accidentally bumping into her in the cafeteria, Maya refused to react. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. And Bryce couldn't stand it. One afternoon during gym class, Bryce saw an opportunity to escalate things further. While the students were playing dodgeball, he deliberately aimed a throw at Maya's head, a move that was both reckless and cruel. The ball missed its target, but hit her shoulder hard enough to leave a mark. The coach blew his whistle and asked what happened, but Bryce shrugged innocently. "Sorry," he said with a smirk. "Didn't mean to throw it that hard." Maya didn't say a word. She simply picked up the ball and handed it back without looking at him. That moment should have been satisfying for Bryce. It should have been a victory, but instead, it left him feeling hollow. Her lack of reaction made him feel like he hadn't won anything at all. What Bryce didn't realize was that every move he made was being watched, not just by Maya, but by others around them. Students who had once laughed at his jokes or turned a blind eye to his behavior were starting to notice the pattern. They saw how relentless he was in targeting someone who refused to fight back. And slowly but surely, they began questioning whether Bryce Carter was really as untouchable as he seemed. Maya understood this shift better than anyone else. She knew that bullies like Bryce relied on their audience. Their power came from the people who enabled them by staying silent or laughing along with their cruelty. If she could change how people saw him, she could dismantle his power without ever raising her voice. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. One day after school, Maya overheard Bryce bragging loudly to his friends near the lockers about how easy it was to mess with her. "She doesn't even try to fight back," he said with a laugh. "It's pathetic." But what Bryce didn't know was that someone had recorded his comments, a fellow student who had grown tired of his antics and decided it was time for the school bully to face consequences. The next morning, printed screenshots of Bryce's cruel remarks were plastered across the lockers in the main hallway for everyone to see. Alongside them were photos of other incidents, moments where Bryce had targeted not just Maya, but other students as well. The reaction was immediate. Students stopped in their tracks as they read the evidence of Bryce's behavior. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Whispers of disbelief, anger, and even guilt from those who had once laughed along with him. Bryce arrived at school later than usual that day and froze when he saw the scene unfolding around him. His confident stride faltered as he realized what had happened. The smirk that usually adorned his face disappeared entirely. "Who did this?" he demanded angrily, but no one answered. For the first time in years, Bryce Carter wasn't the one holding all the power. Maya watched from a distance as everything unfolded exactly as she had anticipated. She didn't need to confront Bryce directly or retaliate with aggression. She simply let his own actions speak for themselves. By lunchtime, Bryce's reputation had taken a serious hit. Students who once admired him now avoided him altogether. His friends distanced themselves from him out of fear of being associated with his behavior. And through it all, Maya remained calm and composed. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about sending a message that bullies like Bryce couldn't thrive forever. Their power wasn't invincible. It could be dismantled piece by piece if people stopped enabling them and started holding them accountable. As Maya walked through the hallways later that day, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. not because she had defeated Bryce, but because she had proven something important. Strength doesn't come from fighting back, it comes from knowing when not to fight at all. Part 5. Vin Diesel's impactful appearance. The moment everything changed. What happens when the school's most feared bully realizes he's been messing with the wrong person? When the facade of power he's built for years crumbles in an instant. Bryce Carter, the self-proclaimed king of Clearview High, was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. And it all began with the unmistakable roar of an engine. Maya Williams had endured Bryce's relentless bullying for weeks. She had remained calm, patient, and composed, refusing to give him the reaction he so desperately sought. But Bryce wasn't someone who gave up easily. His ego wouldn't allow it. He continued to escalate his behavior, convinced that he could break her resolve. What he didn't know was that Maya had a secret, a connection so powerful it would shatter his confidence and expose just how fragile his reign truly was. It was a Friday afternoon, and the school day was winding down. Students were gathering their things, chatting excitedly about their weekend plans, and heading toward the parking lot or bus stop. Maya walked out of the building quietly, as she always did, blending into the crowd. She had perfected the art of going unnoticed. But Bryce had other plans. He was waiting for her near the front steps, leaning casually against a railing with his usual entourage by his side. His smirk was firmly in place, but there was an edge to it, a hint of frustration that had been building ever since Maya refused to play his game. "Hey, new girl," Bryce called out loudly, drawing the attention of nearby students. "Heading home already? What's the rush? Afraid I'll catch up." Maya stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. She could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, the way they were meant to provoke her. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression calm and unreadable. "What do you want, Bryce?" she asked evenly. Her lack of fear only fueled his determination to humiliate her further. He stepped closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "I just wanted to say hi," he said with a fake grin. "You know, make sure you're settling in okay. It must be hard being new here, not having any friends." His friends laughed on cue, their nervous chuckles echoing around them. But Maya didn't flinch. She simply stared at him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Are you done?" she asked quietly. Bryce's smirk faltered for a split second before he recovered. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Maya. He opened his mouth to respond when it happened. The sound, a deep, guttural roar, cut through the air like thunder, silencing everyone in its path. Heads turned as students looked toward the source of the noise. A sleek black Dodge Charger Hellcat pulling into the school parking lot with an authority that couldn't be ignored. The car was a beast, its aggressive design and growling engine demanding attention from everyone who saw it. It rolled to a stop near the front steps, and for a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then the driver's door opened. Out stepped Vin Diesel. The collective gasp from the crowd was almost audible as students stared in disbelief at the Hollywood icon standing before them. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, Vin exuded an effortless confidence that made even Bryce Carter look small by comparison. Bryce froze. His usual cocky demeanor evaporated as he stared at Vin Diesel in shock. His friends exchanged nervous glances behind him, unsure of what to do or say. The power dynamic had shifted so suddenly and dramatically that none of them knew how to react. Vin didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke volumes. He scanned the crowd briefly before his eyes landed on Maya. A small smile crossed his face as he gestured for her to come over. "Hey, kiddo," he said warmly as Maya approached him. "Hi," she replied with a smile of her own, one that seemed brighter than any she'd shown all week. Vin glanced at Bryce briefly before turning back to Maya. "You ready to go?" "Yeah," she said simply. As Maya climbed into the passenger seat of the Charger, Vin turned his attention back to Bryce one last time. His expression wasn't angry or threatening. It was calm but firm, like a silent warning that needed no words. Bryce couldn't hold his gaze for long. He looked away quickly, his confidence shattered under Vin's piercing stare. The Charger roared back to life as Vin started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Students watched in stunned silence as the car disappeared down the street, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension and disbelief. For Bryce Carter, this moment marked a turning point, a crack in the armor he had spent years building around himself. For so long, He had believed he was untouchable, that no one could challenge his authority or make him feel small. But in those few minutes outside Clearview High School, everything changed. The whispers started almost immediately after Vin left. "Did you see that? That was Vin Diesel. Maya knows him. Are they related?" Bryce looked terrified. Bryce tried to brush off their comments as he walked away from the scene, but it was clear that something had shifted. The students who once laughed at his jokes or followed his lead now looked at him differently, with curiosity instead of admiration and doubt instead of fear. Maya had said nothing during this entire exchange. She hadn't needed to, but her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. By simply existing as herself and refusing to engage with Bryce on his terms, she had turned his world upside down without lifting a finger. As for Maya, she felt lighter than she had in weeks as she rode home with Vin that afternoon. She knew this wasn't just about putting Bryce in his place. It was about reclaiming her own power and showing everyone at Clearview High that strength doesn't always come from fighting back directly. Sometimes it comes from knowing when to stand tall and let your presence speak for itself. Hey Viet Noi Dung Qua Fan 6 Voi Kak Yu Ka Sao. Viet Bang Tiang On. So Luong Tu Yu Ka La 1002. Fan Imo Dao Thursday Hut De Gay Tamacho Nuoine. Kanjia. Nu Doyo Hoa Kai. Du Tuoi 220 to 65 Tuoi. Chi Viet Fan Loi Doc. Kong Kan Ko and Hung Fan Kok Nu Goi Wai Chien Kan. And on. Emota Hin on Song Dong. Zedung Sung Da Man Mi. Nin Man Cam Suk Va Chao Treo. Gon Gukich Tin. Nip Du Ku Chien Tang Dan. Ket Hop Hin on Va Cam Suk. Kuchien Twen Tin. Jong Nu Mot Bo Phim Voi Chao Treo Lin Tuc. Noi Dung. 6 Bryce's downfall. Maya allows Bryce to continue his bullying until his own actions expose him. Evidence of his cruel comments and behavior is revealed publicly, causing him to lose his social standing and respect among peers. Maya's victory, the power of intelligence and patience. What does victory look like when you don't throw a single punch? When you don't shout, retaliate, or stoop to the level of those who try to tear you down? For Maya Williams, victory wasn't about overpowering Bryce Carter. It was about outsmarting him. And in the end, that's exactly what she did. By the time the dust settled, Bryce's reign over Clearview High had crumbled. The evidence of his cruelty, his mocking words, his relentless bullying, had been laid bare for everyone to see. His reputation, once built on fear and intimidation, was now in ruins. The students who once laughed at his jokes and followed his lead began to distance themselves from him. His friends, unwilling to be associated with his downfall, abandoned him one by one. Bryce was no longer the untouchable king of the school. He was just another student, stripped of the power he had wielded for so long. And Maya? She didn't gloat. She didn't rub her victory in his face or seek revenge for the weeks of torment she had endured. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity, knowing that her patience and resilience had paid off. She had proven that true strength doesn't come from aggression or brute force. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. Maya's victory wasn't just about defeating Bryce. It was about changing the way people saw him and themselves. Her calm defiance had shown her classmates that they didn't have to accept bullying as a fact of life. They didn't have to laugh along or stay silent. They could choose to stand up, not with fists or anger, but with courage and integrity. In the days that followed, Maya began to feel a shift in how people treated her at school. Students who had once ignored her now smiled and said hello in passing. A few even apologized for not speaking up sooner when they saw what Bryce was doing. Maya accepted their apologies graciously, understanding that change takes time and courage. As for Bryce, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might remind him of his fall from grace. He wasn't the same person he had been before, and maybe that was a good thing. Maybe losing his power would force him to reflect on who he really was and who he wanted to be. Maya walked through the halls of Clearview High with her head held high, not because she had defeated Bryce, but because she had stayed true to herself. She had faced adversity with grace and intelligence, proving that even in the face of cruelty, kindness and patience could prevail. Her story wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of a bully. And it was a reminder that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to give up and let your strength speak for itself.